Good evening, or whenever it is that you're watching this. Welcome back to Sentimental Elephants, and we have reached on our musical journey the letter E. Uh, as I said in the introductory video and the last one, uh, that I am going through the alphabet in a Sesame Street style with an artist selected for each letter of the alphabet, and I'm telling about my own personal experience with them, my own musical journey with regards to this artist. Pardon me. Uh, how I discovered them and the effect that they've had on my life, and relevant anecdotes. Now up to the letter E. Um, there's a fair number of artists that fall in that one. Electric Light Orchestra, Brian Eno, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. It's a fairly big one with progressive rock or adjacent artists. Evanescence, Steve Earle, Echo Belly, a rather underrated band from the Britpop era. Always liked them. Echo and the Bunnymen, and also a cool, somewhat obscure spin-off project from Echo and the Bunnymen called Electrofiction. If you can find their first album wherever through a streaming service, or if you're like me and buy actual hard media, if you can find it somewhere, their one album, Burned, is very, very good. And the band I'm about to talk about right now, Eagles, or the Eagles, as I always think of them. I know the band's name is actually Eagles, but I just find it weird to say. So I'm going to be saying the Eagles for this whole video, so bear with me. Okay, this is going to be a bit of a controversial one with some people out there. I always have said that my tastes are a blend of mainstream and weird stuff. People who like the mainstream stuff I'm into often wonder, why do you like that weird noisy junk? And the people who like the weird stuff will sometimes say, how can you like that mainstream crap? And I'll try and explain a little bit of that. But this is probably going to, not be a popular pick among the latter part, the ones who like the weirder stuff. This is band that attracts a lot of negative attention as well as positive. For those of you who are waiting for me to do the weird stuff, it's coming very soon. But the Eagles, synonymous with California, Southern California, mellow folk rock. Mellow is a usual term associated with them. The kind of the country rock style. Fair amount of contemporary countries does seem to be influenced by the Eagles. Sometimes synonymous with just all that's wrong with corporate rock and corporate radio. So why am I a fan? Well, hard to explain. I'll go through my history. This is a band that, looking down at my notes, back in my teen years, I was spending some time with some people, and they played some Eagles, and I kind of liked it, and I was into them for, about 5 minutes. I liked them for a little bit, and then for whatever reason, I kind of turned on them. Mellow was not my thing at that time. It was not my style. There's a fair number of people who will just automatically shoot down anything with regards to the Eagles. Is the fond of that famous quote from the movie The Big Lebowski, "I hate the bleeping Eagles." Kind of trying to keep the language clean here, folks. I would quote that to myself. Graham Parsons, who's an artist I always loved, once said that he thought the Eagles were bubblegum, and it was completely not any kind of authentic country sound to him. So I was like, yeah, Graham Parsons was down on them. That's good enough for me. Of course, later I found out that Emmylou Harris, who I also worship, his Graham Parsons' musical partner, once said, something to the effect of, I don't know what Graham was on about. I always liked the Eagles. I was a fan. So I was like, oh, okay, I was kind of torn. Uh, so what changed? Well, another thing I've often said about myself is that the foundation of my musical tastes is largely composed of artists that I used to hate. And there are many, many, many examples of this, but we're talking about the Eagles here. Well, one band that I truly love, which is Government Mule, once on a live album covered one of their songs, "Wasted Time," which I hadn't heard before. But I thought, oh, this is a really nice song. We'll get back to that song later, but it did put them in my mind. You know, maybe it's time for a reassessment of these guys. And then a bit later, I like to think of it as after my divorce, but really I think it was a year or two before that. Something just happened. I took a chance. I got the greatest hits. Okay, that was a good start, but I wanted to get a little further, a little more deeper into the music, like the instrumentation and their playing and just how it was done. So I got the albums and I was listening to them, and it out of nowhere, it just became the stuff of life to me. I just kept on listening to it. I was heading towards a bit of a melancholy state of mind, as you can imagine, but I kind of needed some mellow at that point, and they utterly fit the bill. And it I know if people think that they're kind of a sterile sort of this sort of just forced calm or whatever. I didn't find that. I found that there was a real warmth and a gentleness to a lot of the music, and I responded to it. I really needed it at that time. Um, they could rock out too, but even then, some of the more rock-oriented songs, if you listen to "Victim of Love," I mean, there's it's powerful, great guitars on it, but there's these beautiful harmonies still coming through on it. And I turned, I was a fan, and there you go. I mean, one thing that was kind of an interesting thing that kind of shaped my perception of it, and it was different how it went out, because I'm a big viewer of music documentaries. I watch a lot. I do a lot of repeat watching of them, and so I can just endlessly quote them while people think that I'm being very impressive with my deep knowledge of music. I'm just repeating stuff I watched in documentaries. And one that I did get is History of the Eagles. It's very in-depth. I think it's about 3 hours or so. And it's got a lot of interviews with the various past and present band members. Now, I'm going to kind of go on a tangent, but it's a relevant one. Some years ago, I saw a documentary called Straight Shooter, and it was on John Phillips, the founder of the Mamas and the Papas. And there's a lot of interview footage with him. I gotta say this, he came off quite obnoxiously. And just, I saw this and I thought, I never want to listen to another note of this man's music again. I was kind of, okay, it was a little bit neutral and somewhat favorable going in. It's like, no, it's like it's been only the past couple of years I've been able to revisit that music and appreciate it for what it, there's a lot of good music that he made. But the man's personality just completely put off that. The relevance to this is, in the history of the Eagles, there's a lot of interview footage, and Glenn Frey and Don Henley are very, very candid in this, and quite frankly, candid to the point of being abrasive. They didn't really come off as nice people. Side note before I get back, that one thing that I found interesting about this is that when Joe Walsh had, he'd done his interviews, And then he watched a rough cut of the documentary, and he saw the footage from Don Henley and Glenn Frey. He asked, and I think he ended up doing this, wound up going back and doing his interviews again when he saw how they were. Not that he was wanting to, get his bit in and be abrasive, but he felt they were being so candid and open about their emotions, good or bad, that he felt he should open up, and did open up more about his own journey, particularly about his addictions and his struggles with them. As I said, they came off very abrasive, but I didn't have the same reaction that I did with John Phillips. It wasn't, oh, these guys are so obnoxious, I never want to listen to them. I thought, wow, okay, these aren't super nice guys. But I've got a greater appreciation for their music, regardless of whether or not I'd want to hang out with them. I get how they made this great music. Glenn Frey is particularly so. I feel Don Henley is a little bit more subtle about it, but he can be, kind of not super friendly at sometimes. Particularly what came up in the documentary is the situation with Don Felder, who was their guitar player. He does speak candidly as well on his own in the documentary. The way he left the band or was forced to leave, I'm not going to go into the whole story. It did seem to me to be kind of, to use my dad's classic line, dirty work at the crossroads. But at least in the documentary, he does get to give his side about it. One particular notable anecdote regards the making of the song Victim of Love, which is one of my favorite Eagles songs. Don Felder, felt that he had been promised a spot on the Hotel California album for a lead vocal, and he had a part in the creation of Victim of Love and thought that was going to be his song. And as it is stated in the documentary, they did many takes of him doing the lead vocal, and according to Don Henley, they were not up to band standard. And when their manager Irving Azoff took Don Felder out for dinner, this was a ploy to get him out of the studio while they re-recorded the lead vocal with Don Henley on lead vocals. Don Felder, as you can imagine, was not particularly enthused by that. However, in the documentary, he does concede that there was no real argument for Don Felder's vocal over Don Henley's vocal, and then goes on to say there's no real argument in favor of anybody else's vocals over Don Henley's vocals. I feel sympathy with that. I've seen Don Felder live. I like his voice. I think that he is a very good singer. He's primarily a lead guitar player, but he's a very good singer who just happened to end up in a band full of great singers and Joe Walsh. Which leads me to the next topic. Regardless of what you can say about the man, Don Henley has one of the most incredible voices in music. I will die on that hill. In the Eagles and in a lot of his solo work, some of his solo work I'm not completely amazed by, but it's what I call signature. It's got a very unique quality. It's just, he makes it seem so effortless, and it's got a wonderful emotion to it. And there's just this beautiful grain. There's this kind of this sort of a, I don't know if it's quite a husky quality, but that very special timbre he has, there's nothing like it on earth. And when it's in full effect, it's it's just breathtaking. Uh, Full credit again to the other singers in the band, primarily Glenn Fry has a beautiful contrast to it. It's got that sweet, that sweet pure quality to it. Listen to Tequila Sunrise, or what's the song I'm thinking of here? Sorry for the long pause. This is, I'm sure, making for great viewing. Lying Eyes, and is capable of doing this amazing sort of gentleness to it, and it can rock out as well. And underrated singers. Well, both of the bass players were underrated singers. Randy Meisner, the original bass player, uh, conspicuous leads that he had included. Well, his most famous one was "Take It to the Limit," where he hits those incredible high notes at the end. Um, there's a song on Desperado, which is a certain kind of fool, and it's an underrated classic. Also, uh, Try to Love Again on Hotel California. Check that one out. That's an amazing song. And he was later replaced by Tim Schmidt. Um, Always quote the anecdote that Tim Schmidt replaced Randy Meisner in the band Poco. And then when Randy Meisner left or was fired from the Eagles, Tim Schmidt replaced him in the Eagles. Quick little tangent, just while I have it in mind. Uh, Eagles were technically a supergroup. I don't like that term because it gets misused a lot. Like, say, any big huge band were a supergroup. Saying, well, guess what? The Who were not a supergroup. The Beatles were not a supergroup. The Rolling Stones were not a supergroup. Uh, it depends on your viewpoint. Led Zeppelin might have qualified as a supergroup because it was two of the biggest session pros in London, and they were forming a new band, and that was a big thing, which they did with these two complete nobodies from up north. A supergroup is a band that consists in part or entirely of already established musicians who have a reputation going in from previous work, and now they're joining together. So Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, that was a supergroup. Cream was a supergroup. It was somebody out of John Mayall's Blues Breakers and the Yardbirds joining up with two well-known, at least in the I think Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker had established a name for themselves in Graham Bond organization, but that was a very big deal, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going on a bit too much about that, but yeah. So the Eagles were kind of a supergroup because it was made up of some musicians who were, kind of from different bands and had a certain reputation established going into forming this group. I think it was kind of neat that really going into it, Don Henley and Glenn Fry, who would be the most famous members of the band to start out there, also Joe Walsh, but he had a reputation going in. He had a career going in. But they had they were the least known members of the band, or the least established. Glenn Fry had been in a duo called Long Branch and Penny Whistle with the great songwriter J.D. Souther. And Glenn Fry was in a band called Shiloh, which was originally called Felicity. And I think they were first signed by Kenny Rogers. But they hadn't done that much. But Randy Meisner had been in Poco, which was established band. And they had a good career in the 70s. And Bernie Ledden, their original lead guitar player, was definitely had put his name on the map by that point. He was in the Flying Burrito Brothers, and he was in he'd worked with Gene Clark, one of my favorite singer-songwriters from the Byrds. But I think I've digressed enough on this point. But as I say, Meisner and Ledden, who are not the most famous people going out of the band, but they were probably the biggest names going in. Tim Schmidt. Back to Tim Schmidt. He had the last hit of the Eagles' original run on the long run. He was only on that one album, that original run, and when they reunited later, he was in the band. but he did lead vocal on "I Can't Tell You Why," and that's just a wonderful, wonderful vocal. It's an amazing song. I didn't realize until quite some time afterwards that was the Eagles, but that's a great song. Uh, I've always said about Tim Schmidt that he was one of the real truth in advertising uh, people as far as singers go. And what I mean by that is if you hear "I Can't Tell You Why" and think, oh, I wonder what I wonder what that singer looks like. And then you see a picture of Tim Schmidt. I was like, yeah, that's the guy. He completely looks like that. He's got a sort of, he's very slender and very, very pretty and kind of a delicate, kind of an ethereal looking, it's almost elfin sort of look, and it matches his voice, which is sweet and delicate and like I say, very pretty, and he looks like that. Some lead singers, like, they look completely not like their voice, but Tim Schmidt definitely does that. But yeah, so there's, as I say, there's a band based on vocals, great harmonies, and they had some really amazing singers throughout. But Glenn Fry definitely had the Glenn Fry, pardon me, Don Henley definitely had the most distinctive voice. Um, so just wrapping up, my usual thing. Favorite album? Well, I feel there's a difference here between the objective best album and my favorite album. I think the best album, top to bottom, is Hotel California. And that's a good one to start with. Most people will start with Greatest Hits, which is it's a good collection of their other songs. It's the biggest selling album of the 20th century, and you'll get the basics there, but uh, there's more to them than that. And all it came out just before the album Hotel California, so if that's your favorite song, it's not it's not there. But my favorite album is Desperado, their second album. There's something about that one. I'm a sucker for a concept album. Um, Even if you don't view it as a concept album as such, it's a great song cycle. It's just like all these songs flowing one in and out of the other, and the way it begins with Doolin Dalton, and it ends with that wonderful medley of a recap of Doolin Dalton and a recap of Desperado, and it just the way it ends just kind of takes my breath away, and it goes in a number of different moods within the same sort of general ambiance. It's a great take on a song by David Blue called Outlaw Man, I believe it is, and it's one of their more rock, more country rock than sort of the mellow country rock, and it's great. Yeah, check that one out if you know the hits. Well, I don't think this video is going to convert anyone. If you didn't like the Eagles before, I don't know. I think this is gonna turn you around on this. But if you're kind of maybe a little interested in them and maybe know the hits, I encourage you, check out those albums. Check out some of those deeper cuts. There's a lot of good music uh, that's not just enclosed in those few songs that classic rock radio will just play over and over and over again. Uh, it's worth your while to dig into them if you want. If you want to have some music you can play on a Sunday afternoon and kind of relax to, and maybe let your thoughts go a little deeper into them. Check out some of those lyrics. There's some really good lyrics in a lot of those songs. There's the wonderful instrumentation. Below you can just go past those wonderful vocal harmonies, and there's a sweetness and a little bit of an edge to it. Favorite song is I mentioned it before, is Wasted Time. It's about the end of a relationship and kind of moving on past that. It's one of the most sublime Don Henley lyrics and vocals. When I did what I call my divorce anniversary set, which was a performance that I got to do of a few songs, that was around the anniversary of my divorce, and I was thinking about that. I made sure to include that song. I love performing it, and if you don't know it, check it out. But ending on a little bit of a bittersweet note here. thank you for watching it. If you stayed this long, it's one of my longest videos. I didn't think I'd be going this long. And I'll be back with F for the much promised weird stuff. Thanks for watching.